The soundproof walls didn't muffle the silence between them. Silence, after all, is the loudest sound when two people pretend not to care. Ethan Monroe leaned against the glowing control panel, his jaw set as he studied the man in the recording booth. Adrian Vega, 23, America's rising star, the kind of boy whose voice could make a stranger cry and whose smile could convince you to sin twice, was staring at him instead of the lyrics on the screen. And that was the problem. Again, Ethan's voice cut through the intercom, low and steady, though his hands betrayed him by tightening around the fader. From the top, Adrian's lips curved into something between defiance and a plea. Or maybe you just like torturing me. The words landed heavier than they should have. He wasn't wrong. Ethan did like keeping him there, pushing him, stretching every note out of him until Adrian had nothing left but the truth in his voice. But what haunted Ethan wasn't the music. It was the way Adrian looked at him, like the kid wasn't afraid of burning alive if it meant dragging Ethan into the fire with him. Outside, Manhattan's skyline flickered through the glass walls of the studio, neon bleeding into the night. The year was 2032, and music had become more machine than man. But Adrian's voice was stubbornly, devastatingly human. That's why Ethan had chosen him. That's why Ethan couldn't walk away. Sing, Ethan repeated, softer this time, like a prayer, and Adrian did. His voice cracked halfway through, not from lack of talent but because of the weight sitting in his chest. When the last note bled into silence, Ethan didn't clap, didn't praise. He just looked, his brown eyes unreadable, hiding storms Adrian was desperate to uncover. Adrian pulled off the headphones and stepped into the control room. The tension followed him like static electricity, invisible but alive. You ever get tired of pretending, Ethan? Ethan raised a brow. Pretending what? That I'm just your project. There it was, the line they had both been circling for months, maybe years. A line that, if crossed, could ruin everything. Adrian wasn't a fool. He knew the risk of asking. Ethan wasn't blind. He knew the danger of answering. But before Ethan could shut it down, before he could put another wall between them, the studio door opened. A woman stood there, pale, trembling, clutching the small hand of a boy no older than 6. Ethan, she whispered, her voice breaking, he's yours. The silence that followed was not the kind that happens when music fades. It was the kind that cracks open lives. Adrian froze. The boy looked up at Ethan with the same brown eyes Ethan saw in the mirror every morning. And Ethan, who had survived the industry, who had buried scandals and outlasted betrayal, suddenly forgot how to breathe. The boy blinked at Ethan, clutching the woman's hand as if it were the only thing anchoring him in the strange, humming room filled with glowing machines and heavy silence. Ethan's body stiffened, his hand still resting on the console. Every ounce of his composure, honed from years in the industry, threatened to shatter. Adrian's throat went dry. He had thought he knew the outlines of Ethan's life, the guarded stories, the half-finished sentences, the way the man's past always slipped like smoke between his fingers. But nothing had prepared him for this. Nothing had prepared him for a child with Ethan's eyes. The woman's face was pale, strained. Her hair was damp from the rain, clinging to her temples, and her coat looked like it had been grabbed in haste. She wasn't here for theatrics. That much was obvious. She was here because she had no choice. His name is Daniel, she said. He's 6. He deserves to know. Ethan swallowed hard, his gaze flicking between the woman, the boy, and Adrian, lingering, almost apologetically, on Adrian. For the first time since Adrian had met him, Ethan looked cornered, like every wall he'd built had just collapsed in one brutal instant. Adrian stepped forward before he even realized it. His voice was softer than he intended, meant more for Ethan than anyone else. Ethan? But Ethan couldn't answer. Not yet. His mind spun, fragments of the past clawing their way forward, the choices he had made, the life he had locked away so he could survive in this one. He had thought he'd buried it deep enough. He had been wrong. Daniel's small voice cut through the silence. Are you my dad? The words were so simple, but they dropped like a bomb. Adrian's chest clenched, his breath catching. He looked at Ethan, waiting, willing him to say something, to deny it, to confirm it, anything. Ethan's lips parted, but nothing came out. His hands curled into fists at his sides, the only visible sign of the storm raging inside him. Finally, he forced the word past his throat, low and raw. Yes. The woman exhaled shakily, relief and pain mixing in her expression. Daniel, though, just stared at Ethan, searching his face with wide, unblinking eyes. Adrian felt his own pulse hammering in his ears. The studio, once his sanctuary, now felt like a stage where a script had been rewritten without warning. He wanted to reach for Ethan, to anchor him, but he didn't know if Ethan would pull away or worse, if he wouldn't. The woman squeezed Daniel's hand and looked at Ethan. I can't do this anymore. He needs stability, Ethan. He needs his father. Ethan's voice cracked on the word. Why now? Because he's asking questions I can't answer anymore. Because he deserves the truth. Her eyes softened, but there was no room for negotiation. You deserve it too. Ethan's gaze dropped to the floor. His reflection glared back at him from the glossy tiles, fractured by the dim light. Adrian forced himself to speak, his voice quieter than the hum of the machines. Ethan, you don't have to face this alone. It was a risk saying that in front of the woman, in front of the boy, but Adrian didn't care. Not anymore. The secret was already bleeding into the room, threatening to consume them. Pretending now felt like cruelty. Ethan finally met Adrian's eyes. The guarded producer mask was gone. What remained was raw, fragile, and terrifyingly human. Adrian, he whispered, almost like a plea. The moment fractured when Daniel tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Do you want me? The innocence in the question cut deeper than any accusation could. Adrian saw Ethan's body jolt, saw him swallow hard as if holding back 1,000 unsaid things. Slowly, hesitantly, Ethan crouched down so he could look his son in the eye. I don't know how to do this, Ethan admitted, his voice trembling in a way Adrian had never heard. But yes, I want you. Daniel's lips curved into a hesitant smile, one that made Adrian's heart ache. The woman straightened, her eyes glistening. I'll give you time, but you need to figure this out, Ethan. For him. She pressed a kiss to Daniel's forehead, then slipped out, leaving a silence heavier than before. The door clicked shut. It was just the three of them now, the producer, the singer, and the boy who had just changed everything. Adrian's chest felt tight. He wanted to go to Ethan, to comfort him, but he also knew Ethan was standing on a precipice he hadn't chosen. So instead, Adrian knelt down, meeting Daniel's curious eyes. Hi, Daniel, Adrian said gently. I'm Adrian. Daniel tilted his head. Are you Daddy's friend? The word Daddy hung in the air like a fragile thread. Ethan flinched, then exhaled slowly. He's more than that. The words stunned Adrian as much as they steadied him. They weren't a confession. Not fully. But they were something real, something Ethan had never dared to give before. Daniel seemed to accept it, nodding solemnly. Okay. The boy yawned then, the kind of unguarded yawn that reminded Adrian just how small he was. He rubbed his eyes, and Adrian's chest ached at the thought of what this child had been through to end up here, in this neon-lit room, in the hands of a man still learning how to be human outside of music. Ethan finally rose, running a hand through his hair, his voice ragged. But Adrian cut him off, standing and meeting him head-on. Don't. Not now. He needs you more than I do tonight. Ethan's eyes softened with something like gratitude and grief all tangled together. For the first time, Adrian saw the cracks not as flaws but as proof that Ethan wasn't untouchable. He was breakable, and maybe that was what made him worth loving. Daniel tugged on Ethan's sleeve again. Can we go home? Ethan hesitated. Home. The word felt foreign, like a language he had forgotten. But he nodded. Yeah, kid. Let's go home. As Ethan gathered Daniel's small backpack, Adrian watched them. And for the first time, he wasn't just watching a producer. He was watching a man standing at the edge of a new life. A life Adrian wasn't sure he'd be allowed into. But when Ethan turned back, his eyes found Adrian's in the dim light. For just a heartbeat, he didn't look afraid. He looked like a man who wanted to believe there could be room for music, for love, for a boy who deserved both. "Come with us," Ethan said quietly. Adrian's heart stuttered. "Are you sure?" "No," Ethan admitted. "But if I'm going to figure this out, I don't want to do it without you." And just like that, the night shifted. The studio no longer felt like a prison. It felt like the place where everything had begun. The taxi ride was quiet, the city flashing by in streaks of neon and rain. Daniel's head eventually slumped against Ethan's side, his small breaths even and steady. Ethan kept an arm around him, staring out the window like the city might offer answers he couldn't find inside himself. Adrian sat on the other side, his hands twisting in his lap. He wanted to reach out, to lace his fingers through Ethan's, but he stayed still. Not because he didn't want Tobit, because he understood this wasn't about him. Not yet. When they finally reached Ethan's apartment, a sleek high-rise overlooking the city, the three of them moved in silence. Ethan unlocked the door, the lights flickering on to reveal a space too pristine, too untouched. It was a place designed for work, for control, not for children. Daniel's wide eyes scanned the room. "It's big." Ethan managed a weak smile. "Yeah, too big, maybe." Daniel wandered toward the couch, running his hands over the leather cushions like he was memorizing them. Adrian's chest tightened again. This wasn't a home yet, but maybe it could be. Ethan lingered by the door, his shoulders slumped. Adrian walked over, lowering his voice. "You don't have to do this alone." Ethan looked at him, eyes haunted. "I don't even know how to start." "You start by being here," Adrian said simply. "By not running this time." Ethan closed his eyes, the weight of years pressing down on him. When he opened them again, something had shifted. It wasn't resolve yet, but it was the beginning of it. "Stay," Ethan whispered. "Please." Adrian's throat tightened. He nodded, and in that moment, under the sterile lights of Ethan's too-perfect apartment, a new kind of music began. Not the kind that came from notes or lyrics, but the kind that came from three lives colliding, breaking, and maybe, just maybe, finding harmony. Daniel fell asleep almost as soon as his head hit the pillow in Ethan's guest room. The boy's small frame was swallowed by the oversized bed, his breath steady and innocent in a way that made the silence of the apartment sharper, heavier. Ethan stood in the doorway longer than he should have, watching. His son, his flesh and blood, a life he had never planned for, never dared to want. Yet here he was in his home, tangled into his reality without warning. The word father still didn't fit on his tongue. Tasted foreign, jagged. Behind him, Adrian leaned against the wall, arms folded. He didn't say anything, and Ethan was grateful for that. He couldn't take words right now. Words were too sharp. Finally, Ethan stepped back and pulled the door almost shut, leaving it cracked just enough to let in the hall light. He turned and walked toward the living room, his movements stiff, as though each step was a decision. Adrian followed quietly, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous apartment. When they reached the living room, Ethan sank onto the couch, his hand dragging down his face. He looked less like the unshakable producer Adrian had known and more like a man who had finally run out of armor. For a long stretch of silence, Adrian just watched him. The hum of the city outside filled the room. Finally, Adrian broke it. "He looks like you." Ethan's hand stilled. His eyes flicked up, unreadable. "Don't. I'm not judging," Adrian said gently. "I'm just saying what's obvious." Ethan's jaw tightened. "You think I didn't notice?" Adrian sat down beside him, careful to leave space, but close enough that Ethan could feel the gravity of his presence. "I think you notice everything, and that's why this is killing you." Ethan laughed, but it was bitter, hollow. "You think I'm killing myself because of him?" "No," Adrian said, steady. "Because you've built a life that doesn't have room for him, and now you're realizing it should have." The words landed, sharp and true. Ethan's eyes darkened, and for a moment Adrian thought he had pushed too far. But then Ethan leaned back, his head tipping against the couch, and exhaled. "I've spent years making sure I never lost control," Ethan said quietly. Everything in this world, this industriate eats you alive if you give it even an inch. So I stayed in control. Always. And now? Adrian asked softly. Ethan's gaze drifted toward the hallway where Daniel slept. His voice dropped, raw. Now control doesn't matter. Because he exists. And I don't know how to be what he needs. Adrian's chest ached. He wanted to reach for him, to tell him that it was enough just to try. But he knew Ethan wasn't ready for comfort, not yet. What he needed was truth. You'll figure it out, Adrian said. Because you want to, and because he doesn't need perfect. He just needs you. Ethan's eyes flicked to him then, sharp and searching. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The air between them thickened, charged with everything they'd left unsaid. Ethan's lips parted, and Adrian thought the peta might finally break the silence. But then Ethan shook his head and looked away, burying whatever words had almost escaped. Adrian swallowed his disappointment. He wasn't surprised. Ethan had always been a master of restraint. Still, sitting there in the quiet, Adrian made himself a promise. He would stay. No matter how long it took, no matter how many walls Ethan rebuilt, Adrian wasn't walking away. The next morning was chaos. Daniel was awake at 6, exploring the apartment like it was a museum. He pulled books off shelves, pressed buttons on remotes, stared at the sprawling view of Manhattan with his nose against the glass. Ethan, groggy and unprepared, trailed after him with a mix of panic and awe. Don't touch that, no. Not that either, Jesus. Kid, you're fast. Adrian leaned in the kitchen doorway, biting back a laugh as Ethan tried, and failed to keep up with a 6-year-old tornado. Breakfast, Adrian called. Ethan shot him a glare. Do I look like I have cereal in this place? Adrian smirked. You look like you haven't bought groceries in a month. He disappeared into the kitchen, rummaging through cabinets until he found eggs and bread. Not much, but enough. Within minutes, the smell of sizzling butter filled the air. Daniel came running in, his eyes wide. Are you cooking? He asked. Adrian chuckled. Trying to. You like scrambled eggs? Daniel nodded eagerly. Ethan hovered in the doorway, looking torn between gratitude and defensiveness. You don't have to, Ethan started. Adrian cut him off. Relax. It's breakfast, not a blood oath. Daniel giggled, and Ethan's shoulders loosened, if only slightly. They sat around the sleek glass dining table, Ethan stiff, Daniel excited, Adrian amused. Daniel talked nonstop about school, about superheroes, about a dog he wanted but couldn't have. Adrian listened with genuine interest, chiming in with questions that made Daniel beam. Ethan, meanwhile, mostly stared at his plate, overwhelmed. But every so often, his eyes would flick to Daniel, softening, despite himself. Adrian noticed. He noticed everything. After breakfast, Daniel asked if he could see Ethan's studio. Ethan hesitated, then nodded. They went downstairs, Daniel's hand gripping his father's tightly as if afraid of getting lost. Inside the studio, Daniel's eyes widened at the glowing panels, the towering speakers, the instruments lined up like soldiers. It's like a spaceship, he whispered. Ethan managed to smile. Yeah, something like that. Adrian hung back, watching as Daniel climbed onto the stool in front of the mixing console, his small fingers hovering over the buttons. Ethan crouched beside him, guiding his hand carefully, explaining what each fader did. His voice softened in a way Adrian had never heard before, gentle, patient, almost tender. For the first time, Adrian saw not just a producer, not just a man suffocating under control, but a father. Clumsy, terrified, but trying. And that sight, it broke something in Adrian's chest. In the best possible way. But the world outside didn't wait. By the end of the week, whispers had already started. A child spotted with Ethan Monroe. A mysterious boy who looked suspiciously like him. The industry didn't forgive surprises, and scandal was currency. Ethan tried to shield Daniel, keeping him tucked inside the apartment, canceling meetings, dodging calls. But secrets in this city were like cracks in glass, they spread fast, impossible to hide. One evening, as Adrian returned from grabbing groceries, he found Ethan pacing the living room, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was sharp, clipped. I said no comment. No, I don't care what the tabloids are printing. This is not for public consumption. He ended the call and hurled the phone onto the couch, running a hand through his hair. Adrian set the bags down carefully, watching him. They know? Adrian asked. Ethan's jaw clenched. They always know. Like vultures circling before the body even hits the ground. Adrian stepped closer. Then don't let them control the story. Tell it yourself. Ethan scoffed. And what? Admit to the world I've been hiding a son for 6 years. You think they'll forgive me? They'll eat him alive. They'll eat me alive. And you, if they ever find out about us. The words hit like a slap, even though Adrian knew Ethan didn't mean them that way. Still, the implication stung. That whatever they were, whatever they might become, was just another liability in Ethan's eyes. Adrian forced his voice steady. So what, you're going to pretend? Again? Keep him locked up like he's part of the furniture? Ethan flinched. Don't. No, you don't. Adrian pressed, anger rising. You don't get to shut down this time. Not with him. He's not a scandal, Ethan. He's your son. Silence fell, heavy and electric. Daniel's laughter drifted faintly from the other room, oblivious to the storm gathering in the living room. Ethan's face twisted, 1,000 emotions warring behind his eyes: fear, guilt, exhaustion. You think I don't know that? Adrian took a step closer, his voice dropping. I think you're still more afraid of losing control than you are of losing him. The words landed like a blade. Ethan's breath caught, his eyes dark and pained. He looked at Adrian as if he wanted to scream, to fight, to run, but instead, he whispered something so soft Adrian almost missed it. You're right. Adrian froze. He hadn't expected Ethan to admit it. Not so easily. Ethan sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. I don't know how to be this person. I don't know how to love him without breaking everything else I've built. Adrian's chest ached. He crouched down in front of him, forcing Ethan to look at him. Then let it break. Let it fall apart. Because maybe what you've built isn't what you were meant to keep. For the first time, Ethan didn't look away. His eyes searched Adrian's, raw and desperate, as though hoping to find an answer he couldn't give himself. And in that moment, Adrian leaned forward, their foreheads almost touching, breath mingling in the charged silence. Ethan, Adrian whispered, you don't have to do this alone anymore. The words hung there, trembling between them. And for once, Ethan didn't pull away. That night, after Daniel fell asleep, Ethan and Adrian sat on the balcony overlooking the city. The air was cool, the hum of traffic rising like distant static. Ethan nursed a glass of whiskey, his hands steady but his eyes unfocused. Adrian sat beside him, close enough to feel the warmth radiating off his body. Ethan finally spoke. Do you ever think about what it costs? Loving someone in this world. Adrian's voice was quiet. Everything worth having costs something. Ethan turned to him, his gaze sharp, almost accusing. And what if the cost is too high? Adrian didn't look away. Then you pay it anyway, because living without it isn't really living. Ethan's lips parted, a retort on his tongue, but it never came. Instead, he stared at Adrian for a long, unbroken moment, and then, almost imperceptibly, he leaned closer. Adrian's heart hammered, every nerve on fire, but he didn't move away. He couldn't. And when Ethan's lips finally brushed his, it was tentative, uncertain, like a man who had forgotten how to want but was learning all over again. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a promise, a beginning. Adrian closed his eyes, letting himself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could build something new. Something worth breaking for. The storm broke faster than Ethan could brace for it. Within days, headlines exploded across every entertainment site. Ethan Monroe's secret son? Rising star Adrian Vega spotted with music producer and child in tow. Paparazzi swarmed the entrance of Ethan's building, flashes of cameras cutting like lightning whenever the three of them dared to step outside. Daniel, confused and frightened, clung to Ethan's hand tighter each time. Why are they yelling? He whispered once, his small voice trembling as strangers shouted questions he couldn't understand. Ethan bent low, his own heart breaking. They're just curious. Don't listen to them, okay? But he knew it wasn't enough. Curiosity in this city wasn't innocent. It was hunger, and hunger devoured. Inside the apartment, Adrian found Ethan pacing again, phone pressed to his ear. He was arguing with label executives, his voice sharp and fraying. No, I will not parade him in front of cameras for your damage control. He's my son, not a PR stunt. When the call ended, Ethan threw the phone onto the counter with a thud. His shoulders sagged. Exhaustion etched into every line of him. Adrian walked over, steady. What did they say? What they always say. Ethan's voice was bitter. Protect the brand. Protect the music. As if that's worth more than him. Adrian's chest tightened. He reached out, resting a hand lightly on Ethan's arm. Then stop fighting for the brand. Fight for him. Ethan's eyes flicked to his, raw and vulnerable. And if I lose everything else? Then you'll still have him, Adrian said. His voice softened. And maybe me, if you'll let yourself. For a long moment, Ethan just looked at him as though weighing the cost. But the truth was already carved into his bones. The empire he had built was fragile compared to the boy asleep down the hall, compared to the man standing in front of him now. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. A gossip outlet leaked photographs, grainy, invasive shots of Daniel holding Ethan's hand, Adrian walking beside them. The captions dripped with insinuations, weaving a narrative of scandal and betrayal. By evening, Ethan's inbox was full of demands. Statements, denials, explanations. His label threatened suspension. Concert venues whispered about cancellations. The future he had controlled with an iron grip was slipping through his fingers like sand. That night, he sat in the darkened studio, head bowed over the console. Adrian found him there, silent, shoulders trembling. You can't keep doing this, Adrian said gently. Ethan lifted his head, eyes hollow. I don't know how to stop. Adrian crossed the room and knelt beside him, forcing Ethan to meet his gaze. Then let me help. Let me carry some of it with you. For once, Ethan didn't resist. His hand shook as he reached for Adrian's, but when their fingers laced together, the tremor stilled. You'll get burned, Ethan whispered. Then we'll burn together, Adrian replied. The words broke something open in Ethan, and for the first time, he allowed himself to collapse into someone else's strength. The decision came the next morning. Ethan called a press conference not for his label, not for the industry, but for himself. Adrian stood beside him. Daniel perched nervously on a chair just off stage. The cameras flashed. The questions erupted. But Ethan raised a hand and silence fell. My name is Ethan Monroe, he said, his voice steady. I'm a producer, yes. But more importantly, I am a father. This is my son, Daniel. He is not a scandal. He is not a secret. He is my family. And from this day forward, I will not hide him to protect anyone's profit, not even my own. The room buzzed, reporters scribbling furiously. Ethan drew a breath, his gaze flicking to Adrian, his anchor in the storm. And for those who wonder about the man standing beside me, Adrian Vega is more than an artist I believe in. He's the man I love. If that costs me my career, then so be it. But I refuse to teach my son that love is something you bury to survive. Gasps rippled through the crowd. But Ethan didn't flinch. For once, he felt lighter than he had in years. Adrian's hand found his under the table, a silent vow. Daniel beamed, too young to understand the full weight of the moment, but old enough to know he was wanted. For the first time, Ethan wasn't just surviving. He was living. The backlash was immediate. Headlines screamed. Critics tore him apart. Contracts dissolved overnight. But something else happened too. Messages poured in from fans, from strangers, from fathers who had hidden too long. Thank you for being honest. Thank you for showing us it's possible. You're not alone. The empire Ethan had built crumbled, yes. But in its place, something new began to rise. Adrian's career faltered at first, tainted by association. But when he stepped onto a stage weeks later, his voice carrying songs written in the fire of those nights. The crowd rose to their feet. Not because he was perfect, because he was true. Ethan watched from the wings, Daniel perched on his shoulders, clapping wildly. Adrian caught his eye mid-song, and in that glance was everything. The battles, the scars, the love that had survived them. Months passed. The chaos quieted, the world found new scandals to feed on. Ethan adjusted, slowly, painfully, to fatherhood. There were nights when Daniel cried for a mother he couldn't understand. Mornings when Ethan burned breakfast. Afternoons when exhaustion nearly leveled him. But Adrian was there. Always there. One evening, as the three of them sat on the balcony, city lights glowing like distant stars, Daniel curled against Ethan's chest, half asleep. "Daddy," Daniel mumbled. "Yeah, kid," Ethan whispered. "Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. He looked at Adrian, whose hand rested lightly on his own, grounding him. For a moment, Ethan thought of everything he had lost: control, reputation, the safe walls he had built. And then he looked at Daniel's small hand clutching his shirt, at Adrian's quiet strength beside him. And he realized he had gained something far greater. "Yeah," Ethan said softly, pressing a kiss to Daniel's hair. "I'm happy." Daniel smiled in his sleep. Adrian leaned closer, his voice low, meant only for Ethan. "You deserve this. All of it." Ethan turned to him, their lips brushing in a kiss that was no longer tentative, no longer afraid. It was solid, certain. The city roared beneath them, but for once, Ethan didn't care. The music that mattered wasn't in the studios or the charts or the headlines. It was herein the laughter of a child, the steady presence of a man who refused to let him fall, the fragile, unbreakable harmony they had built together. And as the night wrapped around them, Ethan knew. The song of his life had finally found its melody. Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to get notifications about next videos.